Rainbow Magic, Ruby the Red Fairy, Chapter 6. A visit to Fairyland. Of course we'll search for your sisters, Christy said quickly. Won't we, Rachel? Rachel nodded. Oh, thank you, Ruby said happily. But we're only here for a week. Rachel said, will that be long enough? We must get started right away, said Ruby. First, I must take you to Fairyland to meet our king and queen. They will be very pleased to know that you are going to help me find my sisters. Rachel and Christy stared at Ruby. You're taking us to Fairyland? Christy gasped. She could hardly believe her ears. Nor could Rachel. But how will we get there? Rachel wanted to know. We'll fly there, Ruby replied. But we can't fly, Rachel pointed out. Ruby smiled. She whirled up into the air and flew over the girls' heads. Then she swirled her wand above them. Magic red fairy dust fluttered down. Rachel and Christy began to feel a bit strange. Were the trees getting bigger or were they getting smaller? They were getting smaller and smaller and smaller, until they were the same size as Ruby. I'm tiny, Rachel laughed. She was so small. The flowers around her seemed like trees. Christy twisted round to look at her back. She had wings, shiny, delicate as of butterflies. Ruby beamed them. Now you can fly, she said. Let's go. Rachel twitched her shoulders, her wings fluttered, and she felt herself rise up into the air. She felt quite wobbly at first. It was very odd. Help! Christy yelled as she shot up into the air. I'm not very good at this. Come on, said Ruby, taking their hands. I'll help you. She led them up out of the glade. Rachel looked down on Rainbow Island. She could see the cottages next to the beach and the harbor. Where is Fairyland, Ruby? Christy asked. They were flying higher and higher up into the clouds. It's so far away that no mortal could ever find it, Ruby said. They flew on through the clouds for a long, long time. But at last, Ruby turned to them and smiled. We are here, she said. As they flew down from the clouds, Christy and Rachel saw places they recognized from the pond picture. The palace, the hillsides with their toadstool houses, the river and flowers, but there were no bright colors now because of Jack Frost's spell. Everything was a drab shade of gray. Even the air felt and dim. A few fairies walked miserably across the hillsides. Their wings hung imply down their backs. No one could be bothered to fly. Suddenly, one of the fairies looked up into the sky. Look, she shouted. It's Ruby. She's come back. At once, the fairies flew up towards Ruby, Christy, and Rachel. They circled around them, looking much happier and asking lots of questions. Have you come from Rainbow, Ruby? Where are the other rainbow fairies? Who are your friends? First, we must see the king and queen. Then I will tell you everything, Ruby promised. King Auburn and Queen Titania were seated on their thrones. Their place was as gray and gloomy as everywhere else in fairyland, but they smiled warmly when Ruby arrived with Rachel and Christy. "Welcome back, Ruby," said the Queen. The Queen said, "We have missed you. Your Majesties, I have found two more mortals who believe in magic," Ruby announced. "These are my friends, Christy and Rachel." Quickly, Ruby explained what had happened to the other rainbow fairies. She told everyone how Rachel and Christy had rescued her. "You have our thanks," the king told them. "Our rainbow fairies are very special to us." "And will you help us to find Ruby's rainbow sisters?" the Queen asked. "Yes, we will," Christy said. "But how will we know where to look?" Rachel wanted to know. "The trick is not to look too hard," said Queen Titania. "Don't worry. As you enjoy the rest of your holiday, the magic you need to find each rainbow fairy will find you. Just wait and see." King Oberon rubbed his beard thoughtfully. "You have 6 days of your holiday left and 6 fairies to find," he said. "A fairy each day. That's a lot of fairy finding. You will need some special help." He nodded at one of his footmen, a plump frog in a button-up jacket. The frog hopped over to Rachel and Christy and handed them each a tiny silver bag. The bags contained magic tools. The Queen told them. "Don't look inside them yet. Open them only when you really need to, and you will find something to help you." She smiled at Christy and Rachel. "Look!" shouted other frog footmen suddenly. "Ruby is beginning to fade." Rachel and Christy looked at Ruby in horror. The fairy was growing paler before their eyes. Her lovely dress was no longer red but pink, and her golden hair was turning white. "Jackfroost's magic is still at work," said the king, looking worried. "We cannot undo his spell until the rainbow fairies are all together again." "Quickly, Ruby," urged the Queen. "You must return to Rainspell at once." Ruby, Christy, and Rachel rose into the air, their wings fluttering. "Don't worry," Christy called as they flew higher. "We'll be back with all the rainbow fairies very soon." "Good luck," called the king and queen. Rachel and Christy watched Ruby worriedly as they flew off. But as they got further away from fairyland, Ruby's color began to return. Soon she was bright and sparkling again. They reached Rainspell at last. Ruby led Rachel and Christy to the clearing in the wood, and they landed next to the old black pot. Then Ruby scattered fairy dust over Rachel and Christy. There was a puff of glittering red smoke, and the two girls shot up to their normal size again. Rachel wriggled her shoulders. Yes, her wings had gone. "Oh, I really love being a fairy," Christy said. They watched as Ruby sprinkled her magic dust over the old black pot. "What are you doing?" Rachel asked. "Jackfrost's magic means that I can help you look for my sisters," Ruby replied sadly. "So I will wait for you here in a pot at the end of the rainbow." Suddenly the pot began to move. It rolled across the grass and stopped under the weeping willow tree. The tree's branches hung right down to the ground. "The pot will be hidden under the tree," Ruby explained. "I'll be safe there." "We'd better start looking for the other rainbow fairies," Rachel said to Christy. Where shall we start?" Ruby shook her head. "Remember that the queen said," she told them. "The magic will come to you." She flew over and sat on the edge of the pot. Then she pushed aside one of the willow branches and waved at Rachel and Christy. "Goodbye and good luck." "We'll be back soon, Ruby," Christy promised. "We're going to find all your rainbow sisters," Rachel said firmly. "Just you wait and see." And it's end of Rainbow Magic, Ruby the Red Fairy.